My daughter-in-law became CEO and fired me in front of everyone. We don't want outdated people in the company. As I packed my things, I smiled and said, "Good luck." That's when my millionaire son walked through the door. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." The conference room fell silent as Amanda's voice cut through the air like a blade. "We don't want outdated people in this company anymore." Her words echoed off the glass walls, and I felt every pair of eyes in the room turned toward me. 25 employees, some I'd hired myself, others I'd mentored for years, all watching as my daughter-in-law delivered what felt like a public execution. I sat there, my hands folded carefully in my lap, trying to process what had just happened. At 65, I thought I'd seen everything life could throw at me. I'd survived my husband's death, raised Michael as a single mother, and helped build this company from the ground up. But nothing had prepared me for this moment. Margaret Amanda continued, her voice sickeningly sweet now. "Your services are no longer needed. Please clean out your office by the end of the day." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the only sound in the suffocating silence. I could see Emma from accounting dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Thomas from marketing looked like he wanted to say something, but kept opening and closing his mouth like a fish out of water. These people had become my second family over the years. And now they were witnessing my professional funeral. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting after sitting through what I now realized had been a setup disguised as a quarterly review meeting. My hands didn't shake, though I expected them to. Instead, I felt an odd sense of calm washing over me like the eye of a hurricane. "Well," I said, my voice steady and clear, "I suppose that's that." I gathered my notepad and pen, the same ones I'd used in countless meetings just like this one. "I'll gather my things." Amanda's perfectly manicured eyebrows rose slightly. I could tell she'd expected tears, maybe begging, certainly some kind of emotional outburst that would validate her decision to the room full of witnesses. Instead, I walked toward the door with my head held high. Margaret called out James from the design team, his voice thick with emotion. "This isn't right. You built this place." I paused at the doorway and turned back to look at him, then at the rest of the room. "Thank you, James. That means more than you know." My eyes found Amanda's, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker across her face. Uncertainty, maybe, or fear. The walk to my office felt endless. 35 years I'd been with this company. I'd started as a secretary when Michael was just a toddler. Worked my way up to operations manager, then to vice president. I'd seen this place grow from a small family business to a multi-million-dollar operation. And now, in the span of 6 minutes, it was over. My office door creaked as I opened it. A sound I'd been meaning to fix for months. Now someone else would have to deal with it. The space that had been my second home looked smaller somehow, as if Amanda's words had physically shrunk everything I'd accomplished. I pulled out the cardboard box I kept in my closet, originally intended for donations to charity. How fitting that it would now hold the remnants of my career. Picture frames went in first. Michael's graduation photo, a snapshot of the company's first major contract signing. A group photo from last year's Christmas party when everyone still smiled at me. As I packed, I found myself thinking about Amanda. Beautiful, ambitious Amanda with her perfect blonde hair and her MBA from some prestigious university. She'd swept into our lives 4 years ago like a whirlwind, and Michael had been absolutely smitten. I'd tried to be welcoming, tried to see what my son saw in her, but there had always been something that didn't sit right with me, something I could never quite put my finger on. The soft knock on my door frame interrupted my thoughts. "Mrs. Patterson." It was Emma, one of the younger accountants. Her eyes were re-rimmed, and she clutched a tissue in her hand. Yes, dear. I just wanted to say this is wrong. Everyone knows how much you've done for this company for all of us. I smiled at her, genuinely touched. Thank you, Emma. But sometimes, change is necessary. Even as I said the words, I didn't believe them. This wasn't about change or progress. This was about something else entirely. After Emma left, I continued packing in silence. My coffee mug, with the chip on the handle from when I'd dropped it during a particularly stressful budget meeting 7 years ago. The small, succulent plant that had somehow survived, despite my notorious black thumb. The award plaque from the Chamber of Commerce recognizing our company's contribution to the community. By 4:00, my office was stripped bare except for the furniture. The walls looked naked without my certificates and family photos. I took one last look around, memorizing the view from my window that overlooked the parking lot where I'd watched so many employees come and go over the years. I carried my box through the main office, feeling the weight of everyone's stares. Some people were openly crying now. Others pretended to be busy with their computers, but I could see them watching from the corners of their eyes. Amanda was waiting by the elevator, her arms crossed, and a satisfied smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. I trust you have everything, she asked, though her tone suggested she couldn't care less. I shifted the box in my arms and looked at her directly. Really looked at her. The expensive suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month. The diamond earrings that caught the light just so. The wedding ring that matched the one my son wore. The one that had made him so happy when she said yes. I do, I replied calmly. Then, surprising myself as much as her, I smiled. Not a bitter smile or a forced one, but a genuine, almost serene smile. Good luck, Amanda. You're going to need it. Something shifted in her expression just for a moment. The confidence flickered, and I saw a flash of something that might have been panic. But then the elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside, without looking back. As the doors closed and I began my descent to the parking garage, I found myself thinking about that flash of panic in Amanda's eyes. What did she know that I didn't? Or perhaps the better question was, what did I know that she thought I didn't? The elevator stopped with a soft ding, and I walked toward my car, that strange sense of calm still surrounding me like a protective bubble. I had the oddest feeling that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Sitting in my car in the company parking lot, I found myself transported back to that spring evening 4 years ago when Michael first brought Amanda home for dinner. I should have trusted my instincts then, but love makes us blind. And Michael had been so radiantly happy. Mom, I want you to meet someone special, he'd said on the phone that Tuesday afternoon. His voice had that breathless quality I hadn't heard since he was a teenager with his first crush. Can you make your famous pot roast this Sunday? I'd been delighted. At 38, Michael had had his share of relationships, but none that warranted meeting his mother. I'd spent the entire weekend fussing over the house polishing silverware that hadn't seen daylight in months, and practicing conversations in my head. When Sunday arrived, I heard Michael's key in the front door, just as I was pulling the roast from the oven. Mom, we're here, he called out, and there was something in his voice, a nervous excitement that made my heart flutter with anticipation. Coming. I wiped my hands on my apron and hurried to the living room where Michael stood with his arm around the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen in person. She was tall and willowy, with cascading blonde hair that looked like it belonged in a shampoo commercial. Her dress was simple but elegant, the kind that whispers money without shouting it. Mom, this is Amanda Lewis, Michael said, his eyes never leaving her face. Amanda, this is my mother, Margaret. Amanda stepped forward with a smile that belonged on magazine covers. Mrs. Patterson, I've heard so much about you. Michael talks about you constantly. Her handshake was firm, confident, but there was something in her eyes that didn't quite match the warmth of her smile. Something calculating. "Please call me Margaret," I said, immediately chiding myself for looking for problems where there probably weren't any. "And I've heard nothing about you, which means my son has been keeping secrets." Michael laughed, but it sounded forced. "I wanted it to be a surprise. Amanda and I met at that business conference in Dallas last month. During dinner, Amanda was the perfect guest. She complimented the food, asked thoughtful questions about the family photos on the mantel, and listened with apparent fascination as I told stories about Michael's childhood. She even insisted on helping with the dishes, though I noticed she was careful not to chip her manicured nails. "Your home is so cozy," she said as we worked side by side at the sink. "It must have been wonderful growing up here, Michael." But something about the way she said it with just a hint of condescension in the word cozy made my shoulders tense. When she thought I wasn't looking, I caught her surveying the modest furnishings with the kind of expression someone might wear when visiting a quaint museum. After they left that evening, I called my sister Linda. "There's something off about her," I confessed, staring at the lipstick mark Amanda had left on my good water glass. "Margaret, you always say that about Michael's girlfriends." Linda reminded me. "Remember Jessica? You were convinced she was after his money, and she turned out to be one of the sweetest girls I've ever met." Linda was right. Of course, I had a tendency to be overprotective when it came to Michael. He was my only child, and after his father died when he was 15, we'd become exceptionally close. Maybe too close. Over the following months, I watched Amanda slowly weave herself into Michael's life. She had an MBA from Northwestern, she told us, and worked in corporate consulting. She was between jobs, she explained with a delicate sigh, having left her previous position due to philosophical differences with management. Michael was completely enchanted. He started dressing differently, trading his comfortable khakis and polo shirts for expensive suits that Amanda helped him pick out. His apartment, which had always been functional but lived in, suddenly looked like something from a home decorating magazine. "She has such good taste," he gushed to me during one of our weekly lunches. "You should see what she's done with my place. It's like having a whole new life." That phrase stuck with me. A whole new life. As if his old life, the one that included his mother and childhood friends and familiar routines, wasn't good enough anymore. The changes in Michael became more pronounced as the months passed. He started missing our weekly lunches, usually with apologies and explanations about important business dinners or weekend getaways that Amanda had planned. When we did see each other, Amanda was usually with him, steering conversations toward topics that excluded me or gently correcting his stories about our family. "Oh, Michael, you're being modest," she'd say with a laugh when he talked about his college achievements. "You don't need to downplay your success for anyone." The implication being that he was downplaying it for me, his own mother. The wedding announcement came exactly 20 months after that first dinner. They decided on a small ceremony, immediate family only, at an expensive resort in Sonoma Valley. "Nothing fancy," Michael assured me. Though the venue probably cost more than I made in a year, I tried to be supportive, tried to focus on Michael's happiness, but Amanda made it increasingly difficult. During the wedding planning, she would ask for my opinion on flowers or music, then explain why my suggestions wouldn't work. "Margaret, that's sweet, but we're going for a more sophisticated aesthetic," became her standard response. The night before the wedding, as I sat alone in my hotel room, I called Linda again. "I feel like I'm losing him," I admitted, tears finally coming after months of keeping them at bay. "Margaret, this is normal," Linda said gently. When children get married, the dynamic changes. It doesn't mean Michael loves you any less, but it felt like less. It felt like Amanda was systematically erasing me from my son's life, one small change at a time. And the most frustrating part was that she was doing it so skillfully, so subtly, that pointing it out would make me look like a jealous mother who couldn't let go. The morning after the wedding, as Michael and Amanda prepared to leave for their honeymoon in Europe, Michael hugged me goodbye. "Thanks for everything, Mom." he whispered in my ear. I'm really happy. I held him tight, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with something new. Amanda's expensive perfume that seemed to cling to everything now. That's all I want, I whispered back. Your happiness. But as I watched them drive away, Amanda's perfectly manicured hand resting possessively on Michael's arm, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just witnessed something more significant than a honeymoon departure. It felt like a goodbye. Now sitting in this parking lot 4 years later, with a cardboard box full of my career in the back seat, I realized my instincts had been right all along. Amanda hadn't just wanted Michael's love, she'd wanted his life, and eliminating me from the company was just the latest step in her systematic takeover. What I couldn't understand was why Michael was letting it happen. The son I'd raised was loyal and protective, especially when it came to family. The Michael I knew would never stand by while someone treated his mother this way, unless he didn't know. Unless Amanda was even more cunning than I'd given her credit for. I started my car and pulled out of the parking lot, glancing once more at the building where I'd spent most of my adult life. Something was very wrong here. Something beyond a simple case of a controlling daughter-in-law. As I drove home, one thought kept echoing in my mind. If Amanda had lied about this, what else had she lied about? I was halfway home when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Michael's number, and for a moment my heart leaped with hope. Maybe he'd heard about what happened. Maybe he was calling to apologize to fix this mess his wife had created. Hello, sweetheart, I answered, trying to keep the strain out of my voice. Mom, I just landed at the airport. I'm heading straight to the office. Is everything okay? Amanda's been sending me strange texts all day. My breath caught. Michael had been in Portland for a week-long business conference. He didn't know. Amanda had orchestrated my humiliation while my own son was 3,000 miles away. I'm fine, dear. Just had an interesting day at work. I pulled into my driveway, my hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. You should probably go straight home, though. I'm sure Amanda missed you. There was a pause, and I could hear airport noise in the background. Mom, you sound weird. What's going on? Nothing that can't wait until tomorrow. Drive safely. I hung up before he could ask more questions. Let Amanda explain herself. Let her try to spin whatever story she'd concocted to justify firing his mother while he was away. Inside my house, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table staring at the cardboard box I'd carried in. The silence felt oppressive after years of constant phone calls and urgent emails. For the first time in decades, I had absolutely nothing I had to do. My phone buzzed with the text from Emma. Mrs. Patterson, after you left, Amanda called an emergency meeting. She said you'd been embezzling funds and that's why you were terminated. Everyone knows it's not true, but she made us all sign NDAs. I'm so sorry. The mug slipped from my hands, tea spilling across the table, embezzling. Amanda was accusing me of stealing from the company I'd helped build. The audacity was breathtaking, but the implications were terrifying. If she was spreading that lie, she was covering up something much bigger than my termination. I grabbed my laptop and logged into the company's financial systems, expecting to find my access revoked. Surprisingly, I was still in the system. Either Amanda was more incompetent than I'd thought, or she'd been in such a rush to get rid of me that she'd forgotten about my administrative access. What I found made my blood run cold. Over the past 7 months, there had been a series of transfers from the company's main operating account to a subsidiary account I didn't recognize. Small amounts at first, then increasingly larger sums. The most recent transfer, made just this morning, was for $60,000. But it wasn't the money that made my hand shake as I scrolled through the records. It was the authorization signatures. Every single transfer had been approved by two people, Amanda Lewis Patterson and someone listed as M. Patterson's secondary authorization, Michael's signature, or what looked like Michael's signature. I printed out the financial records, my printer humming in the quiet house. 25 unauthorized transfers totaling over $250,000, all bearing my son's apparent approval. Either Michael was involved in whatever Amanda was doing, or she was forging his signature. The sound of a car door slamming outside made me look up. Through my kitchen window, I could see Michael's BMW parked in my driveway, and my son striding toward my front door with a fury I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. He didn't knock. His key turned in the lock, and he burst through the door like a man on fire. "Mom, what the hell happened today?" His tie was loosened, his usually perfect hair disheveled from running his hands through it. Amanda said, "You quit, but half the staff is calling and emailing me saying you were fired, and something about accusations of theft." I gestured to the chair across from me. "Sit down, Michael. We need to talk." "I don't want to sit down. I want to know why my wife is telling me one story and my employees are telling me another." He remained standing, his hands clenched at his sides. "Start from the beginning." So I did. I told him about the meeting, about Amanda's cold dismissal, about the accusation of embezzlement that she'd apparently shared with the staff after I left. I watched his face cycle through disbelief, anger, and something that looked almost like relief. "That's impossible," he said when I finished. "Amanda wouldn't do that. She knows how much you mean to me, how much you've done for the company." I slid the printed financial records across the table. "Then explain these." Michael picked up the papers, his eyes scanning the numbers. I watched his expression change as he took in the transfers, the amounts, the dates. When he reached the signature pages, his face went completely white. "This isn't my signature," he said quietly. "I never authorized any of these transfers." "I didn't think you had." He looked up at me, and I saw my little boy again, confused and hurt, and looking to his mother for answers. "But if I didn't sign these, and you didn't make these transfers, then your wife has been stealing from the company and forging your signature to cover it up." The silence stretched between us. I could see him struggling, trying to reconcile the woman he'd married with the evidence in front of him. It's one thing to suspect your spouse of being cold or manipulative. It's another thing entirely to discover they're a criminal. "There has to be an explanation," he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe she was trying to protect the company somehow. Maybe there's something I don't understand about the finances." I reached across the table and took his hand. "Sweetheart, I know this is hard, but you need to look at the pattern here. She fired me while you were away, accused me of the very crime she's been committing, and made your employees sign NDAs to keep them quiet. This isn't protection. This is a cover-up." Michael pulled his hand away and started pacing my small kitchen. "If this is true, if she's really been stealing from us, then she's not just betraying the company. She's been lying to me every single day for months. I'm afraid it might be longer than that." He stopped pacing and looked at me sharply. "What do you mean?" I hesitated. I'd been carrying suspicions about Amanda for 4 years, but saying them out loud would cross a line I couldn't uncross. Once I voiced my doubts about the foundation of his marriage, there would be no taking it back. "Mom, what do you mean I think she's been lying to you since the day you met her?" Michael sank into the chair across from me, his face in his hands. "I need proof. Before I can do anything, before I can confront her, I need absolute proof." I understood. As much as it hurt to see him defend someone who was destroying both of us, I understood. He'd built his life around this woman, planned his future with her. You don't just walk away from that based on financial records and a mother's intuition. What kind of proof? I asked. He looked up, and I saw a hardness in his eyes that reminded me of his father. The kind that leaves no room for doubt. The kind that shows me exactly who I married. As he sat there lost in thought, I realized something had shifted. The blind devotion he'd shown Amanda for 4 years was cracking. He was starting to see what I'd seen all along. But I also knew that discovering the truth about someone you love is a dangerous thing. It changes you in ways you can't predict. As I looked at my son's face, pale and drawn with the weight of betrayal, I wondered if protecting him from this truth might have been kinder than exposing him to it. Too late for that now. The truth was out, spreading like cracks in ice. The only question was how much more damage it would do before everything finally shattered. "I'm going home," Michael said finally. "I need to look at our personal accounts, see if there are other irregularities I've missed, and I need to figure out how to handle this without destroying everything we've built." I walked him to the door, my heart breaking for the pain I could see him trying to hide. "Michael, whatever you find, whatever you decide to do, I'm here. I've always been here." He hugged me tight, and for a moment, he was my little boy again, seeking comfort from the person who'd never let him down. "I know, Mom. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." As I watched him drive away, I felt a mixture of vindication and sorrow. I'd been right about Amanda all along, but being right had cost my son his happiness and his trust in the woman he'd planned to spend his life with. The house felt even quieter after he left, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Not the silence of ending, but the silence before a storm. Tomorrow, Michael would start digging deeper into his wife's deceptions. And I had a feeling that what he found would make today's revelations look like a gentle introduction to the truth. The call came early in the morning. I was already awake, had been lying in bed replaying yesterday's events over and over. When I saw Michael's name on my phone, my stomach clenched with dread. "Mom, I need you to come over now." His voice was hollow, distant. "Don't call first, just come. And Mom, bring your key to the office. I need to get into Amanda's desk." I threw on clothes and drove through the empty streets to Michael's house, my mind racing with possibilities. What had he found? How much worse could this get? The house was dark, except for a single light in Michael's study. I let myself in with the spare key he'd given me years ago. Back when things were normal. Back when I was welcome in my son's home. I found him sitting at his desk, surrounded by papers and laptops. His eyes redrimmed and hollow. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. "Michael." I approached carefully, as if he were a wounded animal that might bolt. He held up a manila folder without looking at me. "Her real name isn't Amanda Lewis. It's Amanda Vulov, and she was never between jobs when we met. She was fired from her previous company for embezzlement." The words hit me like physical blows. "How did you find out?" I asked. "I hired a private investigator 7 months ago." He finally looked up at me, and the pain in his eyes was unbearable. I started having doubts about little things, stories that didn't add up, phone calls she'd taken in another room, the way she'd changed the subject whenever I asked about her family or her past 7 months ago. "Michael, why didn't you tell me?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Because I was hoping I was wrong. Because I was hoping my mother's paranoid suspicions had just rubbed off on me." He gestured to the papers scattered across his desk. "Turns out your paranoid suspicions were the only honest thing in my marriage." I sat down in the chair across from him, the same chair where I'd watched him do homework as a teenager, where we'd planned his college applications, where he'd nervously practiced his proposal speech before asking Amanda to marry him. There's more, he said quietly. The investigator found records of 2 previous marriages, both to wealthy men. Both ended in divorces where she walked away with substantial settlements. My hands trembled as I reached for the folder. Michael, I'm so sorry. Don't apologize yet. You haven't heard the worst part. He pulled out another document, this one with a medical logo at the top. Remember when she told me she was pregnant 6 months into our relationship, when she had the miscarriage that made me propose to comfort her? I nodded, remembering how devastated Michael had been, how guilty he'd felt for not being there when she lost the baby. There was no pregnancy, no miscarriage. She faked the whole thing. His voice cracked. The investigator found medical records. She's been on birth control the entire time we've been together. The pregnancy test, she showed me the ultrasound photos, the doctor's appointments, all fake. The folder slipped from my hands, papers scattering across the floor. Oh, Michael, she used a fake pregnancy to manipulate me into proposing. Then she used a fake miscarriage to manipulate me into an immediate wedding, so I wouldn't leave her in her time of grief. He air-quoted the words, his face twisting with disgust. Every single foundational moment of our relationship was a lie. I knelt down to gather the scattered papers, needing something to do with my hands, while my mind processed this information. Among the documents I found, photographs, surveillance shots of Amanda meeting with a man I didn't recognize, receipts from expensive restaurants charged to company credit cards, bank statements showing the money trail from our business to personal accounts in names I'd never heard. Who is this? I held up one of the surveillance photos. Mark Wilson, her real boyfriend. They've been together the whole time. Michael's voice was getting steadier now, as if talking about it was helping him process the magnitude of the betrayal. The investigator followed them for weeks. They lived together in a condo uptown that she bought with money stolen from our company. Everything she told me about working late, about business trips, about visiting her sick mother, she was with him. I stared at the photo of Amanda laughing with this stranger, her hand on his arm in a gesture of intimacy that should have been reserved for her husband. She looked genuinely happy in a way I'd never seen her look with Michael. How long have you known all this? The final report came yesterday morning while I was still in Portland. That's why I was rushing back. Why I went straight to the office instead of home. I was going to confront her demand, an explanation. He rubbed his face with both hands. Instead, I found out she'd fired my mother and was spreading lies about embezzlement. That's when I knew she was accelerating whatever endgame she had planned. Endgame. Michael pulled out his laptop and turned it toward me. On the screen was a divorce petition already filled out and waiting to be filed. She's been preparing to divorce me for months. According to this, she's claiming I've been abusive, that I forced her to work at the company against her will, that I isolated her from her family and friends. His laugh was bitter. The only family and friends she has are fake, but apparently that doesn't matter in divorce court. But with all this evidence of her fraud, she's been very careful. Most of the stolen money is in accounts with names similar to legitimate business expenses. The forged signatures are good enough that it would take a handwriting expert to prove they're fake. And she's been building her case against me for months, creating documentation of my supposed abuse, my supposed control over her. I felt sick. She's been planning this from the beginning. Longer than that. The investigator thinks she's done this before, probably with both previous husbands. Find a successful man, marry him quickly. Gain access to his finances, steal what she can while building a case for divorce, then disappear, with everything she can get her hands on. The room fell silent, except for the tick of the grandfather clock in the corner, the one that had belonged to Michael's father. I thought about all the family dinners where Amanda had sat at our table, all the holidays where she'd opened gifts and pretended to be grateful, all the times I'd bitten my tongue when I wanted to voice my suspicions. There's something else, Michael said quietly. Something I need to show you at the office. Something I found in her computer that explains why she was so desperate to fire you yesterday. What do you mean? She knows that you've been suspicious of her from the beginning. She's been monitoring your computer access, tracking what files you open, what financial records you review. She fired you because she was afraid you were getting too close to discovering what she's been doing. The irony was bitter. Amanda had been so focused on watching me that she hadn't noticed Michael was watching her. So, what do we do now? I asked. Michael closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair. Now we go to the office and gather evidence. Then we call the police and file charges for fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. Then I file for divorce and try to salvage whatever's left of the company. And personally, how are you handling all this for the first time since I'd arrived? His composure cracked. I don't know, Mom. I thought I knew this person. I thought I loved her. How do you process finding out that everything you believed about your life was a lie? I reached across the desk and took his hand. One day at a time, one truth at a time. And you remember that not everything was a lie. Your family is real. The people who truly love you are real. The company we built together is real. He squeezed my hand. I'm sorry I let her come between us. I'm sorry I didn't listen to you. You don't need to apologize for loving someone even if they didn't deserve it. You need to apologize for questioning your mother's judgment. I smiled, trying to lighten the moment just slightly. He managed a small smile in return. Your judgment has always been impeccable, especially about people who don't deserve us. As we prepared to leave for the office to gather the evidence that would bring down the woman who had nearly destroyed our family and our business, I felt a strange sense of relief. The truth was painful, devastating even, but it was still the truth. And truth, no matter how ugly, was always better than living a lie. The real question now was what else we might find when we dug deeper into Amanda's deceptions. If she'd been this thorough in planning her exit strategy, what other surprises had she left for us to discover? Looking at my son's determined expression as he gathered up the evidence, I realized that whatever we found, we'd face it together the way we should have been facing things all along before a master manipulator convinced him that his mother was the enemy. Now the real enemy was finally unmasked, and she had no idea what was coming for her. We arrived at the office early morning, an hour before anyone else would be there. Michael's hands shook slightly as he unlocked the front door, and I realized this was harder for him than he was letting on. Whatever we found in Amanda's office would be the final nail in the coffin of his marriage. Are you sure you want to do this? I asked as we walked through the quiet hallway. I have to. If I'm going to rebuild this company, if I'm going to rebuild my life, I need to know everything. He stopped outside Amanda's office door. Besides, she'll be here in an hour. If we're going to do this, it has to be now. I unlocked her office with my master key, the same key she'd probably forgotten I still had when she orchestrated my firing. The space was immaculate as always. Amanda's desk was organized with military precision, every pen in its place, every file folder labeled and sorted. Michael went straight to her computer while I searched her desk drawers. In the bottom drawer, hidden beneath a stack of legitimate business files, I found a folder labeled Personal Insurance. Inside were dozens of printed emails between Amanda and Mark Wilson discussing their plans with a casualness that made my stomach turn. Michael, you need to see this. He looked up from the computer screen, his face already grim. Bad news first, or worse news first? I handed him the folder. Let's start with bad and work our way down. He scanned the emails, his expression growing darker with each page. She's been planning to frame me for the embezzlement. Look at this one from last week. He pointed to a particular email. M is getting suspicious about the missing money. Time to accelerate timeline. Make sure evidence points to him, not us. Evidence points to him. Michael turned the computer screen toward me. She's been using my login credentials to make the transfers. She must have watched me enter my password and memorized it. Every single transaction shows my username as the authorization with timestamps that correspond to times when I was supposedly in the office. I felt cold dread settling in my stomach. But you have alibis for those times, right? Meeting schedules, security footage. That's the genius of it. She picked times when I was legitimately in the building, just not at my computer. Times when I was in meetings, or in the warehouse, or at lunch. If someone investigated, it would look like I stepped away from my computer and left myself logged in. We continued searching, finding more evidence of Amanda's systematic destruction of everything Michael had worked for. She'd been documenting his abusive behavior for months, creating a paper trail of fake incidents and twisted interpretations of normal conversations. She'd photographed the modest jewelry he'd bought her, claiming in written statements that he'd forced her to wear ostentatious displays of his wealth to make her feel owned. Every kindness he'd shown her, every romantic gesture, every attempt to include her in business decisions had been weaponized against him. "How did I not see this?" Michael asked, staring at a particularly vicious email where Amanda described him as controlling and possessive for wanting to know why she was working late so often. "Because you're not a sociopath," I said simply. "Normal people don't think this way. Normal people don't plan the destruction of someone they claim to love." We heard the distinctive click of high heels in the hallway. Amanda was early, probably eager to continue her victory lap from yesterday. Michael and I exchanged glances. "What do you want to do?" I whispered. "Confront her with everything. Let her try to lie her way out of this." The footsteps stopped outside the office door. We heard Amanda's key in the lock, then her sharp intake of breath when she realized the lights were already on. "Michael, what are you doing here so early? And Margaret, I thought we discussed that your access to this building was revoked." She stood in the doorway, perfect as always, in an expensive navy suit. Her blonde hair swept back in a flawless shine, but for the first time I could see past the facade to the predator underneath. "We need to talk," Michael said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "Please sit down." Amanda's eyes flickered between us, and I saw a flash of calculation before she composed herself. "Of course, darling, though I'm not sure why your mother needs to be present for a private conversation between spouses, because this conversation involves her. It involves a lot of things you've done that involve her." Amanda sat down gracefully, crossing her legs and folding her hands in her lap. "I'm afraid I don't understand." Michael spread the printed emails across her desk like playing cards. "Let's start with these. Your correspondence with Mark Wilson." For just a moment, Amanda's mask slipped. I saw panic flicker across her features before she recovered. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Really?" "Because there are quite a few emails here discussing our marriage, our finances, and your plans to extract maximum value from both." Michael's voice was deadly calm. "Would you like me to read some of the more interesting passages aloud?" Amanda's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Michael, if you're accusing me of having an affair based on some fabricated documents, I'm deeply hurt after everything we've been through together." "Fabricated?" I couldn't help myself. "Are you seriously going to sit there and lie when we have photographs of you with him?" Michael pulled out his phone and scrolled to the surveillance photos. He turned the screen toward Amanda, showing her a particularly damning image of her kissing Mark outside their downtown condo. "Taken last Tuesday," Michael said, "the day you told me you were visiting your sick mother in Portland." Amanda stared at the photo, and I watched her mental calculations happen in real time. She was deciding whether to continue lying or switch to a different strategy. "All right," she said finally, her voice losing its syrupy sweetness. "So, I've been seeing someone else. That doesn't make me a criminal." "No, but embezzling $250,000 from our company does." Michael opened his laptop and turned it toward her. Care to explain these transfers, the ones with my forged signature? Now Amanda went completely still. This was the evidence that could put her in prison, and we all knew it. Those aren't forged, she said carefully. You authorized those transfers. You just don't remember because you were so stressed about the business. Michael laughed, but it was a harsh sound. I was stressed about the business because money kept disappearing from our accounts. Money that you were stealing. I was protecting our investments, moving funds to safer accounts during the market volatility last quarter. Safer accounts that happened to be in your boyfriend's name. Amanda's composure finally cracked. You don't understand the complexity of financial management, Michael. You've always been too trusting, too naive about money, and you've always been too greedy and too careless about covering your tracks. I watched this exchange with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because Amanda's careful facade was finally crumbling. Sadness because I could see the pain in Michael's eyes as the last of his illusions about his wife died. Here's what's going to happen, Michael continued. You're going to return every penny you've stolen. You're going to sign a confession detailing your fraud, and you're going to leave quietly without making a scene or trying to destroy what's left of this company. Amanda stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. And if I refuse, then I call the police right now and you get arrested for embezzlement, fraud, and identity theft. Your choice. For a long moment, nobody moved. Amanda stood behind her desk like a cornered animal, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. I could almost see her weighing her options, calculating whether she could still salvage something from this disaster. Finally, she smiled. It was a cold, calculating smile that made my skin crawl. You know what, Michael, you deserve everything that's coming to you. You and your pathetic, jealous mother. She turned her gaze to me, and the hatred in her eyes was startling. You never accepted me. You never gave me a chance. I gave you 4 years of chances, I replied evenly. You used every single one of them to hurt my son. Your precious son is weak. He's always been weak. He needed someone strong to make the hard decisions to build something real out of this pathetic family business. By stealing from us, by doing what needed to be done. She grabbed her purse from her desk. You want your money back? Sue me. You want to press charges? Go ahead. But you'll never prove anything. And by the time you're done paying lawyers, there won't be a company left to save. She headed toward the door, then paused and looked back at Michael. Oh, and darling, you might want to get tested. Mark and I haven't been exactly exclusive, if you know what I mean. With that final cruelty, she walked out, her heels clicking arrogantly down the hallway. Michael sat in stunned silence for a long moment. Then very quietly, he said, I think I'm going to be sick. I moved around the desk and put my arms around my son, holding him while he shook with the aftermath of 4 years of lies finally being exposed. Outside, we heard Amanda's car start and speed away. It's over, I whispered. She's gone, and she can't hurt us anymore. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't quite true. Amanda might be gone, but the damage she'd done would take time to repair. The question now was whether we'd be able to salvage the company and Michael's faith and love before she found a way to strike back at us, because I was certain she would try. Women like Amanda didn't just disappear quietly into the night. They always had one last card to play. 6 months later, I sat in my old office, which had been restored to exactly the way I'd left it, right down to the chipped coffee mug and the small succulent that had somehow survived Amanda's brief reign of terror. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the financial reports spread across my desk. Reports that showed our company not just surviving, but thriving. It hadn't been easy. The weeks immediately following Amanda's departure had been a whirlwind of police reports, insurance claims, and damage control. True to her word, she'd tried to make our lives as difficult as possible, filing a counter lawsuit alleging abuse and wrongful termination. But her case had fallen apart when the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit got involved. The federal investigation had revealed that Amanda, whose real name was indeed Amanda Vulov, had been running variations of the same con for nearly a decade. There were victims in 3 other states, all successful businessmen, who'd been systematically robbed by the woman they'd trusted with their hearts and their bank accounts. Michael knocked on my office doorframe, a habit he'd developed since we'd started working together again. "Morning, Mom. Coffee, please." I looked up at my son, noting how much healthier he looked than he had 6 months ago. The hollow, haunted expression was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like peace. He set a steaming mug on my desk and settled into the chair across from me. The same chair where he'd sat as a child while I worked late doing his homework, or just keeping me company. "The Henderson contract came through," he said, unable to hide his smile. "They want us to handle their entire West Coast expansion." That's wonderful news, and it was. The Henderson Group contract would put us solidly in the black for the year, erasing the last of the financial damage Amanda had caused. "There's something else," Michael said, his tone becoming more serious. "I got a call from Detective Morrison this morning. Amanda's trial date has been set." I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. Even though she was locked up, even though she couldn't hurt us anymore, the thought of seeing her again made me uneasy. "Will you testify?" I asked if they needed me to. But Morrison thinks they have enough evidence without putting us through that ordeal. She's facing federal charges in 4 states now. The prosecutor thinks she'll take a plea deal. I nodded, trying to push away the memories of those dark weeks when we'd thought we might lose everything. "Good. The sooner this is all behind us, the better." Michael studied my face with the perceptive eyes he'd inherited from his father. "You're still angry." "Not angry. Disappointed. Maybe disappointed that someone could be so calculated, so willing to destroy people who cared about her." "I've been thinking about that a lot lately," Michael said slowly, "about how she was able to fool me so completely." This was a conversation we'd been dancing around for months. Michael blamed himself for not seeing through Amanda's deception, for allowing her to come between us, for nearly losing his family and his business to a woman who'd never loved him at all. "You loved her," I said gently. "Or you loved who you thought she was. That's not a character flaw, sweetheart. That's what makes you human. But you saw through her from the beginning." "Why couldn't I?" I sat down with my coffee and leaned back in my chair, considering how to answer. "Because I was looking at her as a threat to my son. You were looking at her as someone you wanted to build a life with. We were both right in our own ways. I should have listened to you, maybe. But then you would have always wondered if you'd made the right choice. Sometimes we have to learn things the hard way." Michael was quiet for a moment, staring out the window at the parking lot where this whole nightmare had begun 6 months ago. "I started seeing someone," he said suddenly. My heart did a little leap. "Oh, her name is Sarah. She's a teacher at the elementary school down the street from my house. We met at the coffee shop on 5th Street. He smiled, and it was the first genuine smile I'd seen from him when talking about a woman since before Amanda. "She's nothing like what I thought I wanted before." "Tell me about her." "She's quiet, thoughtful. She makes me laugh, but not in that desperate way where you're trying to impress someone. It's just easy." He paused. "She knows about Amanda, about everything that happened. I told her early on because I didn't want any secrets between us. And she said that the fact I could still trust enough to tell her meant I was going to be okay." He looked at me directly. "I'd like you to meet her, if you're comfortable with that." The question hung in the air between us. We both knew this was about more than introducing me to his new girlfriend. This was about trust, about whether he'd learned from his mistakes, about whether our relationship was strong enough to survive another woman in his life. "I'd love to meet her," I said, and meant it. "Really, really. But Michael, I want you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me that no matter what happens with Sarah or with anyone else you might meet, you won't let them convince you that your family is the enemy. What we have, what we've rebuilt together, it's worth protecting." He reached across the desk and took my hand. "I promise, Mom. Never again." Later that afternoon, as I was preparing to leave for the day, Emma knocked on my door. "Mrs. Patterson, there's someone here to see you. She says she's from the FBI." My blood ran cold. Had something happened with Amanda's case? Had she somehow managed to cause more trouble from prison? The woman who walked into my office was young, probably in her early 30s, with short brown hair and an all-business demeanor. She flashed her badge and introduced herself as Agent Linda Chen. "No relation to Amanda," she assured me with a wry smile. "I wanted to speak with you personally about the Vulov case," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Your testimony and the evidence you provided were instrumental in building our case against her. I'm glad we could help." "Is there a problem with the prosecution?" "On the contrary. Thanks to your cooperation, we've been able to connect Vulov to crimes in 6 states now, not just 4. The pattern of behavior you helped us establish has been crucial in getting other victims to come forward." Agent Chen pulled out a file folder. "I wanted you to know that the total amount of money she stole from various victims over the past 8 years is close to $2.5 million. Your case, as devastating as it was, personally helped us stop her before she could destroy more lives. $2.5 million. I tried to imagine how many families had been torn apart, how many businesses had been destroyed, how many people had lost faith in love because of one woman's greed. What will happen to her now? She's looking at 20 to 30 years in federal prison. With her record and the number of victims, she won't be eligible for parole for at least 15 years. Agent Chen closed the folder. Justice moves slowly sometimes, but it does move. After Agent Chen left, I sat alone in my office as the sun set outside my window. The building was quiet, most of our employees having gone home to their families, their normal lives unmarked by the kind of betrayal we'd experienced. I thought about Michael probably at home getting ready for a date with Sarah the teacher. I thought about the company stronger now than it had been before Amanda nearly destroyed it. I thought about the employees who'd stood by us through the worst of it, who'd refused to believe the lies about embezzlement and family dysfunction. Most of all, I thought about survival. Not just the survival of our business or our family relationships, but the survival of the ability to trust, to hope, to believe that most people are fundamentally good, even when we've encountered someone who fundamentally isn't. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Sarah wants to cook dinner for us Sunday. Her lasagna, she promises, is better than yours. I told her that's impossible, but she's determined to prove me wrong." I laughed out loud in the empty office. The idea of someone trying to outcook me for my son's affection would have terrified me 6 months ago. Now it just sounded like fun. I texted back, "Challenge accepted." "Should I bring my famous garlic bread as backup?" "Definitely. And Mom, thank you for everything." I gathered my things and headed for the door, turning off the lights and locking up the office that had become the symbol of everything we'd almost lost and everything we'd fought to keep. Outside, the evening air was cool and clean. I stood by my car for a moment, looking back at the building where I'd spent most of my adult life, where I'd been humiliated and vindicated, where I'd watched my son nearly lose everything and then find his way back to himself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to build something worthwhile. But tonight, for the first time in months, I felt something I'd almost forgotten how to feel. Peace. Complete, uncomplicated peace. I drove home through the familiar streets, already planning what I'd wear to meet Sarah the teacher, already imagining the conversation we'd have about my son and what kind of future they might build together. This time, I thought with a smile, I'd start from a place of trust instead of suspicion. This time, I'd remember that not every woman who loved my son was a threat to our family. Some of them, if we were very lucky, might actually be exactly what we needed to make our family complete. The road ahead was clear and bright with possibility. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here. VA